course. Our podcast guides you through life's challenges, which is achieving a holistic well-being, offering insights into emotional, spiritual, financial, and physical growth. Today, we have an extraordinary guest. We have Cid. Cid is also a father, husband, lawyer, entrepreneur, veteran, immigrant, and advocate. He leads Citrine Law in, is it Yuma?
Yuma, Arizona. That's
Yuma,
right.
Arizona, where they offer compassionate legal support, specializing in criminal defense and personal injury. In this episode, there is always hope navigating legal and personal challenges. Cid shares his powerful journey and expertise. We'll explore business marketing, stress, justice, life, and health, offering valuable advice to help overcome any obstacle. Cid, what's going on, my man?
All right, what's going on? Thanks for the intro. I like it.
Hey, I try, brother. Like, I like to get your all's background, and then, we live in a day and age where it's just AI, and I just have to leverage that. And they're able to put something spicy together, and we can go about it like that. But I feel like becoming a lawyer, man, just doesn't come off by accident. Like, what kind of happened? Like, why law? Getting into that, what's your background? What happened to getting into that? Was there anything personal that kind of went down?
Ooh, yeah. That's an interesting question. So, lots of people will tell you that, it was their dream, their lifetime dream to just be a lawyer and help people and everybody. Or this is the other one. People say hey, you know what? I got told my whole life that I'm really good at arguing, so I should go be a lawyer, right?
That's what my dad said.
Yeah, no, that's not the way it works. Well, anyways, my particular situation was a little bit different, right? I actually never met a lawyer until I was in law school, believe it or not. And right. I wasn't a huge fan of the what do they call it? Like the CSI and Law and Order and all that other stuff either. What actually happened was that I was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years, and I was in the avionics department. So I worked on radio and radar and, for pretty much every platform that they had. It was EA-6B Prowlers, C-5s from the Air Force, Cobras, rotary, pretty much everything. So navigation systems, comm systems, TACAN systems, all that stuff, right? Really dorking out on this one. But anyways, in my environment and, because of that training, it was all about machines, right? So it's we would get a box out of a radio and this navigation system, we plug it in and it's got a gripe and they're saying, hey, this is the problem. Well, after about 3 years of that, it got to the point where I had the Jedi power. It's I could just read the fault code and hold my hand over it, right? And wave it and be oh, that's the A4 card, transistor number, whatever, replace that and then it's fixed. What it revealed was that in general, a machine is very predictable, right? They always breaks in similar ways, and whatever the problems, they're fairly repetitive, right? That's the first piece of the story. At the same time, I had actually done very successfully. I was 21 years old. 3 years in, and I had already picked up sergeant.
Dang.
I was 85, and I still had 2 years to go. I was really struggling and working hard on getting my bachelor's degree at the same time, but it was kind of tough because there's lots of deployments, lots of moving around, that sort of thing. And one of my supervisors, he decided he was going to help me. And it was awesome, right? And it's one of those things in life, you never know, the doors that open and why, right? But it did. In this case, he said, look, I can help you to make you non-deployable, but you may not like what it entails. And his solution was basically to send me to headquarters. So headquarters for the squadron, it turned into where instead of being supervising, 80 people directly, then I now had oversight of 600 people in the entire squadron. But I was also working directly for the commanding officer and the enlisted personnel below him. So it was the captain, the master sergeant, a gunnery sergeant, and then Sergeant Callan, me.
And don't forget, you're trying to get your bachelor's too in the process of all this.
Right.
Right.
Well, this is what really worked out. The point is more that I went from being fancy and some power to basically cleaning trash bins at the end of the day, even though I was handling a lot of very high level issues. And that's what changed. The reality is that I realized that people problems were always very unique, right? Who's been deployed too long? Who got into a fight with their spouse? Who's losing their marbles? Who's, got in trouble out in town? That sort of thing. Even if nominally the problem can be fairly similar to one another, it's always going to be completely unique. Why? Hey, it's as simple as there is no, duplicate of a person. We're all individuals, so anything is going to be different, no matter how similar. So I did 2 years of that, and believe it or not, the fact that I had a regular schedule allowed me to go to night school during those 2 years, basically every day of the week from 6 to 9, and Saturdays and Sundays from 8 to 1, and complete my bachelor's degree. I got it in electronic systems technologies. It's engineering type background. I got my degree 4 days maybe before I finished my enlistment. Now go figure, I wanted to be a pilot. And the question was, how'd you get around to being a lawyer?
Right.
There was a big story. Lots of things happened. Why I ended up not being a pilot. Maybe a story for another day, or I don't know if you want to get into it. But the long and short is I had actually, made the decision then to leave, where originally I was going to stay in the military. But, I find myself there with a bachelor's degree. I had been married because I, did the military thing and got married when I was 18 years old, and she was 19, now my ex, right? But, at the time, and we decided we were going to go to Phoenix. I had family in Tucson. She had family in Phoenix. It just made sense. It really didn't make a difference to me where we were going to go. But anyways, I hadn't even considered law school until, my wife at the time, the ex, said like, hey, well, why don't you try? I heard that LSATs are coming up in a couple weeks. And I was like, well, I'll check into it. And then it turns out, yeah. And I was in New Bern and Cherry Point, North Carolina, and they were going to have LSATs going in Greenville, 2 hours away, and it was going to be actually like that weekend. So I was like, oh crap. Well, I mean, don't you need to study? I go to Barnes and Noble, buy a book. It's like this big, right? And I'm thinking like, okay, let's see what's up. And I go through the book and it's all logic questions, and I'm thinking it's like, well, logic is logic. You either got it or you don't. It's not substantive. It's not like, what do you know about the law? It's just, how do you logic? Well, yeah, I figured,
make sure that like.
For sure. So, it was like one of those, like I looked at it, I read for about an hour and I was like, well, I either got it or I don't. So, I had already paid for the test. Sure enough, man, from that, like, it was kind of like a Tuesday to the Saturday, sat down, took the test, and basically didn't think about it for maybe, I want to say, almost an entire year. We went to Phoenix, and I spent some time there building a house with my younger brother, because I had pretty big needs. I had that wife. I had my dad, pretty elderly, wheelchair bound, my mom who didn't speak the language, my younger sister. My brother was 14. My sister was, sorry about the beeps there, she was basically 17. Yeah. So anyways, we needed a big house, and I was the one that was working. So built a house and did that thing there for a while. So I basically kind of laid off the whole lawyer thing that, for about a year and a half. And once I had some thoughts about doing it again, I realized that, it would take a lot to be able to quit everything, quit life for 3 years to go to law school, when I was basically the sole provider for the family. And that was a big decision. So then it came about that it was this part-time law school that popped up, provisionally accredited, and all this other stuff in Scottsdale, Arizona. And there's some cool stories about that. But I went, met up, they gave it a chance, and there's a lot of there's cool stories. I had the look left, look right type situations lots of times where I was just kind of like, what am I doing? What am I doing?
Like at a crossroads multiple times.
Oh yeah. But, here we are. And then after graduating law school, passing the bar, 14 years later, I'm still, an Esquire and doing the thing.
Yeah, it was what came in my head is a couple of things there. It's like you were going to school in the military, overseeing a whole bunch of people, and then you, like you said earlier, it's kind of like an engineering background. And when I think of like engineers, it's like they're always wanting to know how things function or how things work. And I could see you kind of thinking about how you said people's situations were different, right? So I'm putting things together in my head to a degree of like, okay, I see how things are. Everyone has a different situation. Here's how people work. Here I am having to humble myself and do the things that I don't want to do after handling all these other higher level issues. And so I think like learning the empathy, humility in combination with those two things of understanding people and wanting to know how things work, I could see how this kind of helps you out today, even just through all of it, just like all like the past things, just here and there. I don't know if I'm like way off base here, but just trying to practice some discernment. That's kind of what I'm seeing. Like, is that kind of accurate, or am I like off base?
I would definitely agree with that. See, ever since law became codified, it basically, in my mind, equated to a troubleshooting matrix. Troubleshooting matrix. If you don't, if you're not familiar with any, anytime you read a manual, and if you buy, if you buy any piece of tech and it doesn't work, it's going to have a little troubleshooting section. It says,
yes.
If it's doing this, then look at that. And if it's not that, then look at this. And if it is this, then we'll go to that. Right. That's the way it is. The reality, it's all codified. So, the soft skills, the soft nature of the is the relationships, right? The relationship itself and the human element of the whole thing. But otherwise, it's kind of like a chess game. If this, then that, and you have to play the cards as they lay on the table.
You're dropping some good stuff, man. I like that. Because, like, one, I'm like a big chess fan. I'm like a little nerd. When you said that, I was like immediately like this is like way back when I was like in middle school, high school. I went to New York a little bit just to fool around, and there's these chess sharks in there, and that just made me immediately think about it. But like back to what you were saying about crossroads too. People like to think like there's this one crossroad in like your life. At least I've thought this way before too, where it's like, oh my gosh, here I am now. I got to make this decision. It's like, it feels like almost like life or death maybe in that moment, that perspective like we were talking about earlier before this podcast. And it's like, it's okay to have multiple of them. And I wanted to identify that because that's something that I just feel like people just forget. It's like, dude, you're going to run into multiple situations. Like you said, troubleshooting. However, I have an interesting question for you.
Okay.
With people in my world, we do marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have to deal with different personality types. People are tech, visionary, implementers, non-implementers, right? I feel like you're able to kind of balance both ends of the spectrum to manage the people from relationships. Because like you got tech people and you came from a tech background, commonly known, tech people like to stand behind a computer and try to avoid maybe any type of meetings or calls unless they absolutely have to do them, primarily because they're busy and they just not people, people persons, if that's even a word. But like the question comes down to having to deal with both ends. If you're a tech person from an engineering background, how does one kind of evolve into being able to balance?
Well, I wouldn't profess to be an expert in it, but
it's okay.
What I would say is that it all boils down to communications, right? The bottom line is, how are you communicating with people? And the strength and what you're talking about, the differences between the groups are going to be primarily related to how you present information, right? In a sales pitch, how you present information, in a presentation of other things, supervisors, or people who work for you. Either way, this is about how you communicate. Now, one of the important pieces is to understand, your audience, right? Like that's what going to be the key is who's your audience. And like you said, I'm going to have people who are hyper technical, and I'm going to have people who are what you call people. I call them socializers, right? I tend to put people in 4 different categories, and it's going to be your director personality, which is going to be a lot of your entrepreneurs, right? We're going to have that high stakes, little patience, talk to me, get to the point kind of thing. You're going to have your thinkers, and that's people who love data and they don't like disarray, and they like A to Z, standard operating procedures, that sort of thing. Then you're going to have your empaths. These are your touchy-feely kind of people, right? They're just everything is going to be communicated as a question of how I feel about the project or whatever it is that we're doing, or whatever information you're providing. And then who else do we have? I said we have director, empaths, thinkers, and socializers. Yeah, I guess that's the 4. Well, maybe I missed one. I don't know. Point being, you can be in a room trying to balance a different group, and it's just about the question of how you direct, the information, because otherwise, it'll change how it's received, right? So how do you balance it? The only thing that I can say is to try to know your audience a little bit. Sort of in knowing who you're talking to, then you can present the information in the best way possible. When we do juries, believe it or not, when we do jury trials, we have a list usually of 100 people for any serious felony, and we filter through and eliminate most of them. In fact, it's usually all but 12 people, right? And that's going to be the 8 people who are actually going to sit on the panel, plus 4 alternates. And what you only have is a list of where they work, how old they are, gender, and very specific little things that, and then you have some of the bio information. And it's basically kind of stuff that you have to sort of preempt. Who are you talking to? Is this a group that is going to, how are they going to feel? Does it even matter if it's a feeling kind of a person, or if it's a person that just wants data, and that sort of thing. So it's a balancing act. I guess that's what I would say. I would agree with you that my background has given me an advantage in that regard, because it has allowed me to speak to different people in different groups. This is actually some wisdom that came from my grandfather, right? My grandfather had a 3rd grade education. He was a cattle herder in a town that is 3 hours south of Mexico City in his youth. Okay. Like, he used to literally do the old Western drive cattle, from 3 hours south of Mexico City all the way up into the States and then go back down. And, and he did lots of stuff. But this is what's impressive about him. Even in spite of that, he valued education tremendously. He had 11 kids and put every single one of them through post-grad education. He was the guy that literally sat behind his kids at university when they were too drunk to be there the next day, to swat them to stay awake during their classes. That's how powerful it is, because that was an increment for the generational knowledge and opportunity for the entire family, right?
That's standard. I bet that standard kind of rose across the board, obviously,
Well, it did, but this is the thing that he also very much instilled, to know the audience. Who are you speaking to? Because it's like, he talked to me about, the context of the circumstance you're in. There's places to be polite. There's places to use big words. There's places to simplify things, and it's kind of like he would, little nuggets is just kind of like, nobody likes somebody who's just throwing in extra fancy words just for the sake of appearing to be smarter than everybody else. In fact, you're losing communication.
Oh,
right?
I love it. I was literally thinking, like, I love when people keep things simple. Like, I'm not having to, like, you ever see like that meme where it's they're trying to come up with multiple equations, just like this dude just trying to write. Like, there's a movie called Beautiful Mind, and he's like writing talk on the you know about that. Like, like you see this huge crazy equation on like the window, give or take, and they're just trying to discern like what's going on. But then when you're like ABC 1, 2, 3, it's like the heavens open up immediately.
Right. No, and again, it's kind of one of those things, think about it. What's the point of saying something if it isn't being understood? That's the essence of communication. You're saying it to convey a message, And if you are saying it above the head, of the person, in a level that is above the person or below, let's not discount that either. If you are also communicating in a level that is below what the situation requires, you will, put people off, right? So you have to be able to learn, how to read the room and stick with that. You know what I mean? Like and in fact, if you can do it in multiple avenues, that's even better. Like if you can have and communicate with somebody, even as simple as 2 separate languages, right? You can have somebody you're speaking to in one language and then the other one. If you have multiple languages to use, that's even better. Think about how much more powerful that the interaction is going to be, right? So
I gotta work on my Espanol. That's for
Espanol,
sure.
yeah, any language, they're all useful, but
man, yes, that's fantastic. And then you even talk about like multiple avenues, because again, like we even in the intro, like you're an entrepreneur, you've had also a family in itself, so like that with communication, like I know like with my wife, it's like we've been together for, I gotta be careful here, I want to say almost 6 years as far as being like together, and it's like I always want to solve those issues, right? And I gotta be like, no, I gotta like just listen and just shut up. I literally have to ask her like, are you looking for me to solve it, or do I just need to like hint an ear to you real quick, And gosh, when you said multiple avenues, that's exactly what I thought about. Does it feel relatable, or like what?
Yeah. I mean, this relates here. Okay, I'm gonna burn a little time on this one. All right, we talked about you talked about the question about these I'm trying to think of the word you used, but these crossroads, that was the word you used. Okay, crossroads. Yes. In terms of where we go and when we're young, things are so important. Relate back to high school, and you're just like, am I going to college? Not going to college? What college do I go to? And it's my girlfriend, what am I going to do about my girlfriend? Right? It's the hugest, biggest thing, and your life is crushing down. And then fast forward 5 years later, and it's like nobody gives a hoot where you went, to school, and you definitely don't talk to your girlfriend. I mean, there are rare exceptions,
Rare, yes.
Your high school sweetheart, that's cool. That's a cool story, but it's not the norm, So think about that, the impact. Even though foundationally, I also believe that there are much larger changes that are going to happen early on in life, right? Like a lot of times, the decisions we make early on in life can have a much more significant impact at a lesser cost or with an exponential result. It's kind of more like a compounding effect, right?
Ooh, okay.
If you think about it, any vector, right? At its apex, at the bottom, it's a very small change. Same thing when you shoot a gun. Technically, at the barrel, the bullet as it exits is the very same spot, but yet the trajectory is very much affected by its direction that's planned, right? And 30 feet later, it's going to be a very different position. So, I also agree with that. But the big deal here, I want to give you my personal example.
Yes.
When I went to, when I was in junior high school, right? So they call it secondary school, and I was still in Mexico because I was born and raised there, and my dad was naturalized U.S. citizen, but his heritage was Polish. So my heritage is Polish and Purepecha Indian from Mexico, but I won't get into that one. That one's digressing. All right, so I'm in Mexico, and over there they have vocational schools very early on. At that point in time, I wanted to be an architect. So for 2 years, I go to vocational school, I graduate, and I got my paper that says I can draft blueprints and all this other stuff, work for an architect, right? That's what I wanted to do. By the time I get done and I have my paper, I go to high school, and then I go to vocational school to be it's basically a thing in combustion engines. Okay. So basically a mechanic. So now I want to be a mechanic. 3 years later, I finish and I've got my little paper that says that I'm a pretty decent mechanic, like UTI, MMI, that sort of thing that they have here in the States. But by then now I had decided I wanted to be a pilot. and it wasn't going to happen in the States. That's the reason why my family came to the States, believe it or not. It wasn't going to happen in Mexico anyways. It could happen in the States. There was a path and a choice because my dad was a World War II vet. He was, in his late 70s at the time. He had lots of cool stories. I won't digress into that. But anyways, the Marines was the way to go, and that's what I wanted to do. So we left, and we left what was not a middle class thing. It was, probably less than that, probably less than middle class. Maybe I was the kid that was basically poor, but never really knew it. How about that?
Okay.
But we came to the States to a situation and place where I definitely knew that we were poor. We went to and it was my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister. We lived in a single wide 2-bedroom, 70-year-old trailer in East LA, and things were rough there, man. It was a little crazy. So I definitely knew.
Just like the location, like what was around at the time, and just
yeah, it was like right in the middle of 2 different gang territories, and
perfect.
It
was family, right?
But anyways, I wanted to be a pilot, brother. And it was worth the sacrifice for my family to literally throw the sheets on the furniture, lock up the front door, and leave, right? And we went into that situation. And then, of course, what did I want to do? I couldn't be a pilot right then and there because you have to be old enough and have a bachelor's degree. Well, scenario 2 is I couldn't afford it, right? So the military said, well, you can be enlisted. You enlist, and they will pay for it. I'm like, okay, So what does it take for me to join the Marine Corps? I'm 16 years old. I have to have a high school diploma from the States. So I did it. I went in and, did the thing and finished a high school degree in 1 year. So then I was 17. Yeah, it was a push, and it was actually kind of fun, but
yeah,
it was a push. It kept me off of the streets too, because I was basically that nerd that stayed there from, first from 0 period to like all the electives afterwards. So when everybody would leave and at that, early bell at 12 or, 3 o'clock for everybody else, I was leaving at 5. Right. And then, do the thing. But anyways, the idea here was that I wanted to say, well, okay, what do I do? And I said, well, I'm going to join the Marines. So I want to do like my dad. I want to be an infantryman. I was 17. I took the ASVAB, the test, and I was fortunate that results were basically, take your pick, whatever you want to do. So I had a chat with my dad, and he said long and short, because he had to sign for me, because I was too young to sign for myself, that no, he was not going to sign for me to be an infantryman like he was, So it was back to like, well, now what kind of a thing, right? 17-year-old mind. And I said, well, talk to the recruiter. And he said, well, you can do whatever you want. Intel, you can do this, you can do whatever. And I said, well, how do I get close to the aircraft? And that's how the decision happened to go into avionics, believe it or not. Just like that. So then I signed up, and that's the next 5 years of my life, right? And I told you kind of a little the progression after that. So, architect, mechanic, pilot, like fighter pilot, right? Engineer, then ultimately to a lawyer. Now, mind you, most lawyers have English majors, political science majors, some psych majors, It's just
if they know that's like their lifelong dream, right? Like,
right.
That's the whole thing. But, what I think about right now? I have and I don't know if she'll ever watch this episode, but it's my sister-in-law, and she is just about to graduate high school, and she's getting into the ironically, she wants to fix cars, but she also goes around and talks about, I want to do this, that, and the other. We had some fun conversations about just starting a side hustle for car detailing, right? Mm-hmm. And like right now she has to go in some type of direction in the beginning, and everyone's trying to tell her like, hey, like, just taste it, see what you like, and if you don't like it, there's always another route. And it's cool to say that that's like what you kind of did, and you kind of fell into that. And if I'm being honest too, like with marketing, digital marketing, like I played a lot of soccer, and cross country, and I went overseas to play soccer. That was my thing. I was going to go be professional and play soccer. I was doing all the things to do it, and I just burnt out of it, man. And there was a moment in time where I just found the sales job. Eventually, I was like, man, I couldn't find like a good thing to sell, I guess you could say. So I had to skill up to find the marketing. This was like almost 8 or 9 years ago. Eventually, and I just kind of fell into this whole digital marketing thing, and I feel like just one experience led to another for you, right?
Yeah, but see, this is where the challenge is, and I guess the point of telling you, and even in observance of what you're telling me right now, here's the question for you.
Okay.
Do you regret or consider that time in a completely different industry or with a completely different goal to be a waste?
In the moment in time when I was younger, I felt like if I didn't pick the right decision, I felt like it would have been like a waste. But what I found out later, I guess like kind of just take some time to like really like evaluate things. One of those crossroads for me, I was like, okay, one experience built off of one another to fill that gap. I felt like wherever I wanted to go, like I feel like that target was always kind of moving, but I was still kind of making a subtle progression, and I feel like that just never ends.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But that perspective, no, I definitely had to battle it. Like if I'm being like human and like the reality of things, it's like, man, to catch on a different day, maybe I felt like it was going to be a waste. Like, but then the next day, I'm like, it is what it is. This set me up to make this connection or learn this skill.
Yeah. Well, I agree completely. I see. In my perspective, we are the construct of our experiences. So everything that you did before is a plus. It's never a waste of time, right? Because you can even consider, it's happened to me, let's think of a, worser case scenario. You know what I mean? Something random that happens, an accident, a car accident.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
As a victim of a car accident, you're just going to be like, well, this is just an absolute waste of everything. I can't work. I'm hurt. I'm going through this trauma and all this other stuff. Yeah, but you know what? You're going to be given a glimpse into perspective that people, that you can't have otherwise, right? So when we're talking about earlier about like how do you speak to people that think differently or come from a different social strata or that think of themselves as something different, like different industries, all this stuff, it comes from your experience previously, right? Because now you're talking, it's like, well, you can talk to a gearhead, you can talk to a jock, you can talk to a nerd, you can talk to, a politician, you can talk to a cattle herder. I mean, that's the point. That's the flavor. And everything, like you said earlier as well, it's kind of like, how does the military relate to what I do in law? Well, there is a very clear correlation now. And also substantively, like the what you're talking about lends itself as well, because even like the stuff that you like to talk about, I know that you like sports, and we've talked about how I like different kind of sports, but it's a thing where if you can talk the talk, if you have the base knowledge, you're going to be able to build rapport. You're going to be able to make the analogies, and they're going to land. I mean, and then you're also just going to know, and it's going to build your personality into how you approach things. Because just getting whooped, like military, I say, military helps. Why? Because it gives you grit. I mean, it does. Even if you don't get anything else out of it, the experience will give you grit. You will see how hard things can be. So you'll have a perspective on what is hard and what is not, and it might even help you think about, your position in terms of gratitude, and it might give you position in terms of how you feel and react to things, which is even more important, right? So it's a thing. I truly believe that, all of our experiences are only a plus, even when they're really bad. Half the time we may not even know why it's happening to us, and it seems incredibly unfair, but, it's not about what happens to us, it's how we react to it. And I'm not saying that we have to be grateful and happy as it's happening. I'm just talking about that hindsight's 2020. And, and then you think like, oh, well, shit, man, maybe I wouldn't have been able to handle this thing that's happening to me now, or the thing that's coming at me if I hadn't previously, gone through something like this or that, right?
This is super cool because the military side of things. Two things. I think of Jocko with his good video that he like went viral on. Every time like something would happen, no matter if it was good or bad, typically people would come to him with problems, and he'd be like, "Good." If you heard that video, have you seen that by chance? It's like you'll this will be something you'd enjoy. Definitely like after this, like go on YouTube and just Jocko Willink, good. And
Jocko Willing, good.
Yes, he is a former Navy SEAL.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
He's actually kind of close. I mean, he's kind of close to he's in San Diego, give or take. I mean, Arizona, Vegas, San Diego, really close. And that's one thing. That's what the first thing I think of, because like as things come at you, I'm just like, when my wife's saying this and this is happening, if it's bad or whatever, I'm just like, good, good. Make it on the nerve sometimes. But that took me a while to learn, man, and I just really do appreciate you saying that. And I think of my dad, and fun fact, he was in the Army he was in the military as well, so I got a little bit of taste of that growing up. A lot of the structure side of things, the discipline, but always that perspective, man. He's just like I unfortunately had someone in my family pass away a few months back, but something, I appreciate that. It was like my great uncle and his wife married me and my wife. So we were still like, kind of connected there. And she came to me, she was like, I don't know if it's like real or not, but why is your dad so daggone positive? I'm like, that's just the way he is, man. Like it's not like a mask or anything. He's just like purely just optimistic guy. And he's an accountant too. So he's always looking at numbers, but he's just so positive, right? And that personality side of things. And when you said that, shifting the perspective, I do think of my dad when you said that. And it's so ironic that you are in the military, or that you were in the military, veteran, and so is my dad. So
very cool.
I just resonate with that hardcore. And over time, man, things were happening to me that I didn't appreciate neither. And just to remember that everything that's happening to you is happening really for you. So,
absolutely, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, so you have a son and a daughter as well. Is that what I expected earlier? So,
I do.
You plan to instill that into them?
Yeah. Well, it's like I said, it's very tough, because that's probably what comes with a grace. That is the one that, because again, if you think about, how it plays, it's a simple concept to discuss, right? But it just doesn't feel right or real, especially when you're going through all that, all the turmoil that comes with things, right? Like that's kind of the point. I think ultimately it boils down to, I've always thought that a lot of my perspective has come from the fact that I've been in many situations that have allowed me to see how shitty can get,
I kind of want to go into that too, man. Like,
sure.
Not to cut you off too. I think that's super cool, because I mean, why it's super cool is because you're the first lawyer I've had on this show, and going into criminal law or personal injury, I mean, heck, I haven't gotten into crimes, thank goodness, myself. But what I have done is flipped a car into another median, and I just walked out. I climbed out of that car with like a scar. I mean, you can't really see it here, but too white for that. But I have one here, and it was a miracle. And I just remember like that messed with me. So like going on how shitty things can get, like go into that, man. Share some experiences if you're allowed to. Maybe you don't have to name any names, but maybe situations.
Sure.
And go into that, man, on the criminal law side. Like, what's that look like in your perspective? I mean, it has to take a toll on you maybe personally, but now you probably have systems and processes to handle it. But yeah, man, just go ham on that. Like that'd be really good.
Sure. So that, that can be, it's a thing that, that resonates in different perspectives, right? And on one hand, I want to say kind of like, things that I've seen, that I've lived through, beyond the trajectory of, what I talked about. growing up in Mexico, and if anybody's had the chance to go, southern Mexico and maybe even the border towns, it's a beautiful country, lots of resources, forever, whatever you want to put into it, it's a thing. There's the tourist zones, there's the zones that are not. But one of the things that are pretty prevalent is that you still see children on the streets panhandling, right? And until you've actually seen it, it's something that you can't really describe. To see a little 4-year-old kid covered in soot, barefoot, no clothes, and holding up a little plastic cup, walking around asking for food, Some of you, some people might be sensitive to, animal rights and all this other stuff. Here we have, a stray dog in the States is not a stray dog in another country. And many, actually, in fact, most of the world, seeing a stray dog that is like, okay, he looks a little scraggly because he's been lost for 3 days, versus seeing a dog that's covered, burned, shaven, like, covered in disease and bones are sticking out. I mean, it's like things to see, perspective, right? I've walked around. I had an opportunity when I was in law school. I spent 6 months at the University of Political Science and Law in Beijing, China. I was very fortunate to have, one of my buddies that had spent some time there and actually spoke the language very well. So we got to wander around. We got to wander around some of the dark alleys. And man, I tell you what, there's some stories that I found myself super drunk on a bottle of 50-cent bottle of wine that was called the Great Wall of China, like literally type
I
on
love
it.
it. I love it.
I mean, it's terrible, right? But the surreal situation of looking left, looking right, and I'm like, it's this dark alley, people eating, crouched down as they do, everything is dark. Some old lady pooping on the side of the street, water flowing, like the Red Guard, walking on by, very impressive, scary looking green uniform, very tall, military people just sort of rolling on by, and you're just kind of like in this whole thing. So to be able to see poverty, right? That's kind of one thing that I've always been very present with. See poverty. I've also been able to see how hard some people have to work to make much less than what I do. I always have considered myself to be very fortunate, in the sense that whatever my efforts have been made, I have sowed upon what I reap. I reap what I've sown, right? Like I make an effort and I get a reward. I feel that that's the case, even when I kind of don't feel like that. And I'll get into that too. But, like, man, I can just tell you, I feel like I don't work half as hard as a lot of people have to be able to accomplish or do certain things. For example, every day when I drive to my office, Yuma is actually an agricultural town. So there's a lot of field work here. It's actually the lettuce capital of the world during the winter. 98% of all lettuce in the United States comes from Yuma during that period of time.
Fun fact.
Yeah,
I would never have thought today I was going to learn that's the lettuce.
It's a crazy desert, as in like we're next to the Imperial Dunes where they filmed some Star Wars, right? Like that sort of looks like the Sahara Desert, but we also have the Colorado River, which feeds huge fields in agriculture. So what do we have? Lots of migrant workers, man. When I'm bitching about waking up and I'm at 6:30 because I got to be to court later and I'm driving, right? Well, guess what? In the winter, it's 40 degrees. And I see these people bent over picking up vegetables, right? With a machine behind them pushing and keeping the tempo. Then I go in the summer, and summer in Arizona, I mean, it's about 108 degrees right now. But hey, they do it then too. Perspective, right? There's some issue there. How's that experience? And then whenever I'm feeling down about myself and my problems, it could be financial or whatever else is going on, I just think of my clients and I say, thank goodness I don't have their problems. I inherently have to deal with their problems, but I'm not the guy charged with murder. I'm not the guy that is literally facing the rest of his life where it says, the great state of Arizona or the United States of America versus my name. My name's below it, right? where it says defense counsel.
I had some cold chills there, man. That was good.
Well, think about it, man.
So
You
real.
know, like I've seen how shitty can get, man. You know, and that's kind of the thing. That's one way to try to stay on top of, you know, how you feel and how you approach things, because, you know, it's a perspective. Back to the whole thing about experience, man. You know, my dad was also kind of what you mentioned with your dad. You know, he had a lot of, you know, he seemed like such a peaceful guy, man. Like just always like, oh, you know, chill. But, you know, he was a World War II South Pacific vet, you know, early discharge because of medical. I mean, he stormed the beaches and went through like some of the worst bush.
They probably killed people. I mean, I'm not saying
Oh,
they
yeah.
did,
Well,
but they
I mean,
probably could have. And it's like, dude, now it's like,
not to brag, not to brag, but, you know, he was also very decorated. And I have articles that were written about him from newspapers that tell some pretty gnarly stories. I mean, he was in the thick of it, but I think that also tempered his life, because it was one of those things. And here, I'll leave that part with this. I have a helmet of his that he wore, and it has a bullet hole that goes in the front, and the straps are cut, and you can see where it went out the back. He was 16 years old when that happened.
Oh my
God. Yeah. I mean, so I'm saying, you know, he had a lot of perspective, because everything could have been very different, you know, entirely, you know, because I also have half brothers and sisters or whatever, but I mean, we're talking just in multiple groups and generations that would have never happened, you know, a quarter of an inch left or right, you know, if the air was traveling the wrong way. So it's kind of weird, right? It's just, it's crazy.
I won't be talking to you right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, forget about everything else. You know, there's like,
just forget. Yeah, just Cid, man. Jeez.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I don't know. I guess, and so that was one way to look at stuff, right? There's the whole thing about how you look at things and trying to understand how other people look at it. I guess I kind of went down that rabbit hole so deep that I'm trying to wonder, like,
hey, you did say disclaimer. We were going to burn some time on it. I was like, go for it. Like, that's all good. That's powerful.
Well,
like, and it's like, okay, so it's like now kind of going into, I see why you do what you do based off of like the holistic approach with you personally. And like when someone does get into that trouble, or maybe heck, like, I mean, when you said getting up early and like having to go to court at this time, like that's even refreshing for me, because like all my life too, like I'm not the most morning person ever. And then when I started to have kids, I'm like, all right, if I still want to go train, if I still want to go to work, like to work at a specific time and get something done, like I have to sacrifice just to simply get up at 5 a.m. by going to bed at 9. But then like it's like you have other people in the world that like, brother, like that's so bad. That's so bad. Like, you know, like first world problems. Like it's like that's all it is. It's like, bro, chill. Everything will happen when it happens. I hired like this alignment coach way back when, and we did some work on that perspective of things. But like when I was in high school too, there was a lot of, I went to like different because I was ADHD, depression, stuff like that. I won't go into like exactly what happened. Definitely cool with another conversation. But I just remember meeting with all these experts and things of that nature. It was always just a pattern of just reset perspective. Like, trust me, there's a lot more things. And I will share this. One time I used to be in this inpatient program. It was literally for 1 week because I said, I'm not that bad. I promise. That's what happened. I saw all these other people. They were way worse off. I'm like, dude, I just got to take a breath and everything will be all right. Just let it work the way it needs to. And just put yourself around people that, you know, support you and can push you to be your best self. And hopefully everything's going to turn out okay. And so far I've kept a 3-year-old alive. I got a 3-month-old that's still kicking too.
Hey.
And I can talk to cool people like you. Like, things are okay in the grand scheme of things.
For the kids thing, I'll say winning. Good job. You know, it's like a thing. No, I mean, it really is. It really is kind of a thing, you know. Let's say, you know, just maybe to make it a little bit more applicable to the audience and
Yes.
this thing, right? Let's talk about it in terms of business, right?
Yes.
And originally what we said, it's one of the messages that I always try to convey, and I say it differently to, potential clients and my actual clients. I tell them, well, you've got this problem, what's happened has happened. We can't change the past. So we're going to work on what the result is going to be as a consequence. And that's why I'm involved. So I'd tell people, and when I said the message is that there is always hope. Well, as they say, it ain't over until the fat lady sings, right? It's until there isn't, there is. And I tell people, okay, when you're hiring me and paying the premium to do that and for what I do, offload onto me a lot of that stress and a lot of that worry and anxiety. We're going to do everything we can to make you at least feel that you have some control over the uncontrollable, right? Because just the lack of knowledge of how the system operates can compound the anxiety and the, the stress, the pain from what's going on, right? So that's one of the important things that I tell people. It's like, I will tell you when to panic. For now, try to let it go. Try to move forward, right? Like that's the point. So in business, it's very similar. We always have issues. And kind of one of the things is that, and we talked about this before the podcast, but it was like a thing. You kind of basically have to embrace the problems. We can't be hiding from them. We can't be, trying to dodge them, trying to whatever. Why? Because problems mean progress. Problems mean growth. As your business, if your business doesn't have any problems, then your problem is probably that your business is not growing or doing anything of significance, right? If you've managed to get everything under control, then you're probably in a real problem, Yeah. The rest of it is just, what is it? It's money problems, it's timeline problems, it's capacity issues, it's skill issues and everything else, right? Well, most of it is just stuff that you can, affect. And even though, it can be very frustrating. I've experienced it with starting new law firms and all this other stuff. You can find yourself in situations where it's like financially, it's already a huge challenge. You're like, I'm already strung out. I can't get enough clients in. I have to implement these new strategies, and everything just feels like super overwhelming. Then you revert to the why me? This is so terrible. Well, that's where what we talked about before should kick in and say like, hey, perspective, man. It's like, what is really happening and how does it really impact things? And half the time we would find that it's really not that, in the construct and full extension of our lives, it ain't probably that important. Like that's just what it boils down to. When people make decisions, it's like we get all bent out of shape about like, well, are we going to hire this guy or that guy? Are we going to get this piece of tech or that piece of tech? Are we going to implement this strategy or that strategy? It's like, well, the reality is you can only control what you can, and you can only make a decision based on the information that you have. So you do your best and move forward, right? Like that's the thing. But our nature just seems to be like we always just focus on the negative part of it instead of what we should, which is always just to move the needle forward. And
I just don't knowing that, man, like just kind of like this is huge for business as well. And like we've talked about like how this affects us, but like also it's like we live based off our past experiences. Right. And what happens is we just put this humongous lens on that experience within our current life because we live like our life based off of that, and then we expand it to the future, and then that's where everything starts opening up. And where people lack is like, all right, how are you feeling and why are you feeling that way? How can you like bring it back to reality? I think that's what kind of made me just think about that immediately. It's just, we call it charge clearing, and like the way I learned it, it's like you'll spend so much energy on an emotion. Got really excited there, and I really wanted to share that. Like that was good. But I bet when you're taking on some like criminal lawyer clients, I bet they have this huge lens on whatever it is they're going through in that moment. So like how do you discharge that? You say you offload them. You don't want them to worry about it because it's your job to take care of that. That's a huge thing, to offload there.
Well, it is, and a lot of for what it's worth, if you look at some statistics, you know, being a lawyer is actually it's a pretty heavy duty job. They have a very high incidence in terms of you know addiction, depression, anxiety, suicide. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. I tell people that it's for the most part, for my clients, it's the worst day in their lives, and they're coming to me for solutions, right? It's my responsibility. That's to try to fix it, unscrew the situation that is screwed down real tight. It's like that's what it's about. And there is expectations because people put bread on the table. It's a thing. So initially it's very difficult, but one of the things that you have to do is to try not to take it personally, right? That in the end, it's actually kind of one of the features that because people have asked me, like, how do you live with yourself representing somebody that it killed a guy? How do you live with yourself, advocating for the guy that committed or alleged to have committed a sex offense, a child molester, somebody who is alleged to committed a violent offense against, someone else, really hurt them, like whatever you want. To that point is, and I'm trying to keep it within the reason of, how do I manage it? Well, okay. Well, how do I manage it? Is that I've made the determination very early on that it's not my job, morally or professionally, to cast judgment. I'm not the judge, right? And second of all, I didn't cause anybody any harm. And actually my purpose is to ensure fairness. That's all.
Beautiful.
If the state can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt past my filter, then so be it, right? That's what I do. I make sure that people's rights are observed, that the rules are being observed, that they're getting a fair shot. That's it. I don't have a magic wand, man. I'm not pulling off, hat tricks here. It's just one of those things. There is a system, and as many flaws as it has, it is one of the, it's the most beautiful system of rule of law that we've had, that is in the world, that I can say. I have not found anything else that would be better. It's just, I always say that it's like, but they say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Well, everybody that's codified all these laws, every solution creates problems, that sort of thing. That's why we've gotten to where things are. But, regardless, it's like that, So what am I talking about? That ultimately I am not taking it personal. I'm not, and I try as much as I can not to emotionally invest myself into the cause, right? It is very difficult to do because you see a lot of what I would consider injustice, right? And that's even touchier. It's like, people would say, it's like, wow, what's harder, a case that is a dead bang loser, or the case where, you feel that the guy is innocent? Well, I would say the latter, because if you screw up, I mean, you really have that burden on you. You know what I mean? And even though it's like going to be harder to do something technically for the person that is guilty of whatever, right? It's kind of a weird thing in how that works. But in the end, so emotionally, how do you deal with that? Well, all the things that everybody recommends is going to be a little bit of, some exercise, some, meditation, some journaling, having a good routine, having a hobby. It's kind of one of those where, for me, it's early on, one of my mentors told me, it's like being a lawyer is what we do, not who we are. Right.
Oh,
yeah. So whatever it is that you do, it's like we tend to identify ourselves and create this literal identity around, what we do. And that's fine for many, but especially in a situation kind of with, in a game that's high stakes like my own, you got to realize that, my priority is being a dad. My priority is being a husband. This is why I do what I do. It's beyond that. It's, I'm a guy that likes motorcycles. I'm a guy that, likes to make a friend, that's what really makes you who you are. Right. So as long as you can have that separation, that bifurcation, and not link it, the other thing is, how do you play a high stakes game? I'm just going to say the business side of it, right? the case side of things is high stakes just because it is, man. You lose, the guy gets 25 to life, high stakes, right? It's like it's a thing.
Yes.
Or even in the lesser stuff, it's like a misdemeanor happens to be domestic violence. Well, the guy gets convicted of a misdemeanor, should be no big deal, but hey, he's a lawful permanent resident, green card holder. They might get deported over that bad boy. Or, he worked in law enforcement. Guess what? His career is out the window, over a misdemeanor. High stakes things, right? But that relates to the substance of it. I'm going to want to talk about is like, how does it do on the business side of it? It's like, well, in a business, my little show here is I've got 10 staff working for this firm, and effectively I'm responsible, for, pretty much, I'm responsible for everything, right? Being an entrepreneur, it's all on you. You're the CEO, and I strive to get to the position of being you can't see it there, but I call it, law firm owner.
I love it.
And that's why I keep that thing that it's, the drive is to be an owner and being able to truly separate myself from the business where it runs on its own, that it no longer needs me to be involved. So it's a choice and not a need. So that's where we're at. But again, it's a big footprint. I've got a nice big 5,000 square foot office and all the bells and whistles. Well, guess what? It's like the overhead is oppressive. You have to maintain a high tempo. So
while selling the vision to others,
absolutely.
That's
absolutely.
That's a whole other thing, isn't it?
It's an absolutely whole other thing. Is you got to, getting everybody on board with what your vision is and what the timelines are. Sharing in the dream, sharing in the stakes of success or failure. You got to remember, nobody's ever going to care about a business as much as the owner does. It's a very tricky thing, but the most and greatest buy-in that you can create is going to be, by allowing people to share in that success too. And so they feel like there's a sense of loss, because otherwise it's like, all right, the business shuts down, I'll find another job. Right. So something to balance, but that's the thing. So how do I deal with that kind of stress? Well, on that one, I'll throw in a plug, but not for a brand. Ice and what do you call it? Cold plunging.
Okay.
I'm an advocate. It's an every morning thing.
I respect it.
Yeah. It's that shock to the body. It's that, and the reason why I do it, like honestly, for no other reason at this point, there's a lot of health benefits, and just Google it, Sure. But for me, what truly is like a straight up, this is why I do it. It's because it literally helps me reframe every morning. It gives me that 3.5 minutes that I'm sitting in 45-degree water, is like condensed, and it helps me truly focus on 2 points. Number one, probably the worst thing that is going to happen to me today, physically, statistically speaking. Yes, I can get into a car accident, bus hit me and end of lights, right? But I voluntarily put myself through it and I survived, right? And I also showed my body what real threat is. This whole thing that when we're always under stress, our parasympathetic system just stops working properly, and you're always riding this wave of anxiety, and you're just like, it's almost like it just never shuts off. The adrenaline is always pouring in. So you get into this thing that is just chronically, like you just feel like crap, like constantly, right? So this hard reset.
About how it's like eating glass, man, but enjoying every minute of it.
No, well, it's a thing, man. And the other thing is that while it's happening, it's the one true opportunity where it requires so much focus to keep it together as the clock is, reducing. It's when I do a lot of, my meditation in the morning is part of it. It's not a relaxed environment. It's coughing is because your body's screaming at you. It's like, but when you narrow it down and you focus, and I can say like, hey, to lay out my intention for the day, to outline my prayer, to say, hey, God, help me focus today. Help me say what I need to say, do what I, hear what I need to say, so that your will is done, with this case or with this situation that's going to happen, with I take on and accept the promises that I have, because of my faith. And I say, it's like, hey man, I need God. You said your promises for my success. I need more clients. Now I need them. I'm asking, and you said, ask and thou shalt receive. I'm asking now.
Right now.
With clarity, with clarity and with conviction. And so I'm doing it now, and that's what happens. And it sort of feels like this amplified intensity, right? So anyways, that's one thing that is just like a very practical thing. Yes, everybody will survive. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to make you sick. I've been doing it for, I want to say something like 8 months straight. So I do it every morning at 6 o'clock.
Congratulations, man.
Thanks.
Discipline,
thanks.
man. That's important. Like, hats off to you, my man. Because getting started, dude, is a whole thing in itself. And just want to take time to respect that one right there.
Thanks.
Yeah,
man. There's that, and then also is mentors, man. Surround yourself with people that can also give you some more perspective, and because there's always an out, and that's kind of the that's probably one of the bigger problems, is that we as the problems happen, and especially since we're the head of the dragon, we can really easily get caught in the fallacy that we're alone. This is the answer. You know what? There's always an answer, and somebody else already did this before. Whatever your problem is, I don't care. We're not that unique. There's billions of people on the planet, just in the US, with millions of people that we have, and entrepreneurs. Guess what? Somebody else already did it. It happened to them, and they figured it out. And maybe some other people happened to them and they didn't. But then you're not unique either. So it's a question of perspective. Now, we love it so much, we're so near impersonal or so close to it, that also hurts. So that's where, again, having mentors, coaches, and even friends that can somewhat relate, friends that are also business owners, small business owners. Everybody talks about masterminds and all that stuff. I think it's a little concept that's a little oversold, but at the same time, it's like having a network of people that you can just be like, damn, it's like, this is going on, and just saying it is helpful. Some people are lucky enough to have, their spouse that is somebody that can deal with it, that has the bandwidth, or even the knowledge, to be able to understand some of those things. And that's a blessing. But if you don't, if you're single or you just, have somebody that would not be able to relate, well, then find it elsewhere. And if not, pay for it. Go to a counselor, man. Like,
it's just the internet, man. Like,
yeah. Right. I mean,
jeez. Speaking of that, I wanted to just take a quick time and plug you in real quick, guys. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to show where you can find Cid as well on the good old Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook here. Let's see here. Let's do the entire, let's see here. We'll do it like this. It makes me select a tab. So I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll just start with Instagram and just kind of show you a couple of different spots here. I'm going to stop sharing and resharing a couple of times, but we're on Instagram here as well. So just kind of pick your platform. He's also on, we got YouTube, we have LinkedIn. I'll start with I think I'm also going to show Facebook real quick as well. This is where it's popping as well. It's where you can kind of get a feel for his team and getting connected with someone that can potentially even help mentor you in your state of unfortunate event, whether it's personal injury or heck, I mean, maybe you just did something and you didn't necessarily do it. You get someone in your corner and lead that justice, and he can, obviously, since you've already heard him on this podcast and talking about how he manages his people, you can definitely know that he's going to take care of you. So I'll definitely leave some links here for, like the YouTube, the LinkedIn, the Instagram, the Facebook, and all that stuff in the description. But yeah, just know that like you have a mentor in your corner if you're dealing with some type of situation. And hopefully, I don't know if do you offer like any free consults or anything like that? How's that work?
Yeah. As it relates to like, professionally, in the criminal and PI areas, yes, it's free consultations and all that other stuff. But, overall, it's, if anybody really kind of has a question, it doesn't have to relate to that specifically, honestly.
Of course.
Sure. I'm kind of a guy it's available. You can see that I like to talk a lot. So, I might have some word. It may be useful to them or maybe not, but I welcome the opportunity to, to try to, help somebody out. Like that's kind of a thing. It is what drives me in the end. That's what gives me a sense of fulfillment. And other than challenges, I'm kind of a competitive person, but I won't get into that. But other than that, it is helping people out.
I can definitely, like you brought up chess earlier, man. I could see you trying to talk some smack. Like, oh yeah, I bet you're gonna move that knight. Got you.
Yeah. It's a thing, man. It's a thing.
I love it, baby. That's what's up. I think I automatically think of that show, Suits, man. Obviously, you probably hear that like all the time. You probably want to roll your eyes, but it was an entertaining show. I like it. Like, I mean, they get into it, man, immediately.
Well, I've had a lot of my staff have always told me, it's like, oh, you should watch this in the new seasons and all this other stuff. It reminds me too much of work and most of those shows, so that's why I don't necessarily enjoy it. I get a little I also kind of get stressed out with the things that aren't true, because then I always I find that somebody's being like railroaded and I'm like, no, screw that, there's wrong something with this and that and that. So it's kind of like my mind can't separate. It's like, hey, that's complete fiction versus this fact pattern that is real.
Fighting in movies, and you're like, oh, you pull that off. It's a movie.
Yeah. No, it's a thing, man. So, anyways, I usually don't, but I have heard all the cool stuff that it's a deal.
Heck yeah, man. Well, hey, I want to definitely respect your time in this. I know you have a busy schedule, and I want to steward that and be sure we get you. Respect your time and whatnot. So I wanted to go ahead and say thank you for hopping on, man. I know whoever's going to be listening to this is going to have a huge impact, especially with perspective switches, whether it's in the professional and personal area. And, if people need help with the personal injury lawyer side of things or criminal law, like they have someone they can actually lean on, and with someone who has multiple of different perspectives from someone who's actually seen a lot of things. So again, thank you, brother. I appreciate you taking the time.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. And if I may, just very briefly, there's 2 points that I wanted to just lay out there real quick.
Beautiful.
One,
yes.
Final thoughts, right? Final thoughts. One of my core values and beliefs is something that is tied into hope. Why hope? I always said there's always hope. And I never told the fat lady sings, until there is no hope and there are no other avenues, there are no other paths that can be followed, then maybe you can say there is no hope. And even then, there's always hope. As long as you're breathing and above earth, there is hope. So rule number one is to say half the battle is showing up. Apply it to whatever fact and circumstance that you have. Half the battle is showing up. A lot of the problems and fears that we have are as to things that are not going to happen. There's plenty of stuff on the topic, but just that's one of the things it's gotten me a really long ways professionally and personally. It's just show up. Right? Don't be afraid. And then the other thing, when to avoid a thing that is also very constricting to both people in business or people going through problems is, paralysis by analysis, right? And, the one of the things that has been a driving quote for me ultimately was, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Not an original thought. That's Martin Luther King quote, but it's the point. Ultimately, just move the needle forward. If you're feeling, being crushed by the business, being crushed by the problem, do something, anything, action, occupy yourself. Don't preoccupy yourself, and it'll make a difference. So, like I said, that was just 2 things that are 2 core values of mine. I wanted to share them out there. Because in many regards, whatever problem we have, that's the answer. Do I show up to this? Don't be afraid, show up. And the next piece is, don't worry about it. It's not moving fast enough. It's not moving big enough. It's not going to happen like, it's happening. Just move the needle forward and it'll be different. So with that, hey, thanks again, man. I appreciate the invitation. I hope, there is some value there for people, and it was fun, man.
No, that's a blessing. We were blessed to have you, man. It was fantastic. I'll go ahead and guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be sure to have all the links to get connected with Cid in the channel, and you bet your ass you'll be able to see definitely some highlights from this episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you.